Have you ever read Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex by Larry Niven? It's his semi-serious examination of what would have happened once Clark Kent hit puberty. It raises some rather interesting questions because, most teenage boys like to spend their time jerking off. And given Superman's super strength, it seems likely that his house would have been riddled with holes caused by his ejaculate, which leads into questions as to how he could get his freak on with Lois Lane or any other woman. And it makes me wonder, what would have happened with Jesus? I mean, if he was really supposed to experience, as so many people claim, the fullness of what it means to be a human, he certainly would have had desires. So, would he have jerked off? Would his ejaculate have shot through the walls of his house? Would it be considered manna from heaven? Did he get his freak on with Mary Magdalene? I just don't know. It makes me curious. Why don't we have stories in the Bible of Jesus as a sexual being?
On the single condition that you identify the body or the living person of the slave called Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is sitting by the computer, staring off into space. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. If you happen to like the podcast, you can follow it on Twitter. TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle, and it's also on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. You can email me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes for this and most other episodes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. Don't forget to rate the show on iTunes. This is a Bible Myths episode where I read a chapter or two from T.W. Doan's Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions. Next episode will be a news episode. Normally I wait to do this until the weekend, but I happen to have a free evening, and I figured I'd go ahead and read a chapter from Bible Myths because it just seemed like a fun idea. Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions is a work written in the late 1800s which attempts to show that many of the stories in the Bible did not originate with the Bible and in fact predate it by a number of centuries. So far as I know, biblical scholarship has generally confirmed that Doan was right about what he wrote, and much of what he says raises rather pointed questions about the Bible and the religions it has influenced over the centuries. You don't need to listen to previous episodes to understand what's going on, but you can download previous episodes at trailerparkatheist.libsyn.com. You can find a free digital version of the book at books.google.com or at archive.org or gutenberg.org. Now on to the book. Chapter 9. Jonah swallowed by a big fish. In the book of Jonah, containing 4 chapters, we are told the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up against me. Instead of obeying this command, Jonah sought to flee from the presence of the Lord, going to Tarshish. For this purpose he went to Joppa, and there took ship for Tarshish. But the Lord sent a great wind, and there was a mighty tempest, so that the ship was likely to be broken. The mariners, being afraid, they cried every one unto his god, and casting lots, that they might know which of them was the cause of the storm, the lot fell upon Jonah, showing him to be the guilty man. The mariners then said unto him, What shall we do unto thee? Jonah in reply said, Take me up and cast me forth into the sea, for I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. So they took up Jonah and cast him into the sea, and the sea ceased raging. And the Lord prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord out of the fish's belly. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. The Lord spake again unto Jonah and said, Go on to Nineveh and preach unto it. So Jonah arose and went unto Nineveh according to the command of the Lord, and preached unto it. There is a Hindu fable very much resembling this to be found in the Somadeva Bhatta of a person by the name of Saktivida, Saktideva, who was swallowed by a huge fish and finally came out unhurt. The story is as follows. There once was a king's daughter who would marry no one, but the man who had seen the golden city of legendary fame, and Saktideva was in love with her. So he went traveling about the world seeking someone who could tell him where this golden city was. In the course of his journeys, he embarked on board a ship bound for the island of Utsthala, where lived the king of the fishermen, who Saktideva hoped would set him on his way. On the voyage there arose a great storm, and the ship went to pieces, and a great fish swallowed Saktiva whole. Then, driven by the force of fate, the fish went to the island of Utsthala, and there the servants of the king of the fishermen caught it, and the king, wondering at its size, had it cut open, and Saktideva came out unhurt. And we've got a footnote. Scroll. Taylor, Early History, Mankind, pages 344 and 345. In Grecian fable, Hercules is said to have been swallowed by a whale at a place called Joppa, and to have lain 3 days in his entrails. Bernard de Montfaucon, speaking of Jonah being swallowed by a whale, and describing a piece of Grecian sculpture representing Hercules standing by a huge sea monster, says, Some ancients relate to the effect that Hercules was also swallowed by the whale that was watching Hesione, that he remained 3 days in his belly, and that he came out bald-pated after his sojourn there. We got a footnote. And it's in French, which I am absolutely positively not going to attempt because I'll just butcher it. It looks like it comes from L'Antique Expliqué, Volume 1, page 204. Boucher, in his Histoire d'Animal, tells us that the great fish which swallowed up Jonah, although it be called a whale, Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, yet it was not a whale, properly so called, but a dogfish called Carcharias, Carcharias. Therefore, in the Grecian fable, Hercules is said to have been swallowed up of a dag, and to have lain 3 days in his entrails. Footnote, Bouchot, History to Animal in Anacalypsis, Volume 1, page 240. We have still another similar story in that of Arion the musician, who, being thrown overboard, was caught on the back of a dolphin and landed safe on shore. The story is related in Tales of Ancient Greece as follows. Arion was a Corinthian, rich Corinthian leather, who had traveled in Sicily and, Italy, and had accumulated great wealth. Being desirous of again seeing his native city, he set from Taurus for Corinth. The sailors in the ship, having seen the large boxes full of money which Arion had brought with him into the ship, made up their minds to kill him and to take his gold and silver. So one day, when he was sitting on the bow of the ship and looking down on the dark blue sea, 3 or 4 of the sailors came to him and said they were going to kill him. Now Arion knew they said this because they wanted his money, so he promised to give them all he had if they would spare his life, but they would not. Then he asked them to let him jump into the sea. When they had given him leave to do this, Arion took one last look at the bright and sunny sky and then leaped into the sea, and the sailors saw him no more. But Arion was not drowned in the sea, for a great fish called a dolphin was swimming by the ship when Arion leaped over, and it caught him on its back and swam away with him towards Corinth. So presently the fish came close to the shore and left Arion on the beach and swam away again into the deep sea. Footnote: Tales of Ancient Greece, page 296, back to the main text. There is also a Persian legend to the effect that... Ouch! Fosnotz is crawling on my shoulder. There is also a Persian legend to the effect that Jemshed was devoured by a great monster waiting for him at the bottom of the sea, but afterwards rises again out of the sea like Jonah in the Hebrew and Hercules in the Phoenician myth. Footnote: see Taylor's Early History of Mankind and Primitive Culture, Volume 1. Back to the main text. This legend was also found in the myths of the New World. It was urged many years ago by Rosenmuller, an eminent German divine and professor of theology, and other critics, that the miracle recorded in the book of Jonah is not to be regarded as an historical fact, quote, but only as an allegory founded in the Phoenician myth of Hercules rescuing Hesione from the sea monster by leaping himself into its jaws, and for 3 days and 3 nights continuing to tear its entrails. Footnote: see Flake, Myths and Mythmakers, page 77, and note, and Taylor, Primitive Culture. Can't read the rest because the scan is so bad. Back to the main text. That the story is an allegory, and that it as well as that of Saktideva, Hercules, and the rest are simply different versions of the same myth, the significance of which is the alternate swallowing up and casting forth of day or the sun by night, is now all but universally admitted by scholars. The day or the sun is swallowed up by night to be set free again at dawn, and from time to time suffers a like but shorter durance in the maw of the eclipse and the storm cloud. Professor Goldzier says, the most prominent mythological characteristic of the story of Jonah is his celebrated abode in the sea and in the belly of a whale. This trait is eminently solar, as on occasion of the storm dragon or the storm serpent swallows the sun, so when he sets, he, Jonah, as a personification of the sun, is swallowed by a mighty fish waiting for him at the bottom of the sea. Then, when he appears again on the horizon, he is spit out on the shore by the sea monster. We got a footnote here. 1 Gold's Ear, Hebrew Mythology, pages 102 and 103. And I'm going to interject here a little bit. In his, I believe it's just mentioned in The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell, he talks about Jonah and other nearly identical stories that exist in many different mythologies. He doesn't equate them with a sun, the sun setting at night, that I recall. He may actually do that, but I don't remember for certain. I do remember that he equates it with the period of deepest sleep that a person is in. He describes it as being, in the womb, where your brain isn't fully formed, and it's the most psychologically comforting sleep that there is. I'm trying to think what all else he mentions about it. Oh, okay. I remember now. It's also the low point of the story where things seem darkest for the heroes, and because George Lucas so obviously cribbed from Campbell, as even Lucas would admit. In the original Star Wars movie, when they're in the trash compactor on the Death Star, that's the belly of the whale. In The Empire Strikes Back, when they're inside the stomach of the giant space worm that's in the asteroid, that's the belly of the whale in that tale. Yes, Fuzznuts, he just hollered at me in case you didn't hear that. I don't remember exactly what scene it would be in Jedi, but let's face it, that movie isn't nearly as good as any of the others in the Star Wars saga, so who the fuck really cares? But it is a common motif in a number of films, examples of which I can't think of too many off the top of my head, although California with what's his name from the X-Files and Californication and Brad Pitt, this where they're in the abandoned nuclear test site, that's the belly of the whale in that movie. And if you haven't read Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces, even if you don't necessarily believe that Campbell was right about what he said, he's hugely influential in entertainment post Star Wars, because there's just a number of films which borrow elements from it. Good examples being the original Star Wars, bad examples being Warlock 2, which blatant. If you haven't seen it, it's a Mystery Science Theater 3000 type of movie that you can tell somebody read Campbell but just didn't get how to disguise elements of it. For example, they have symbolic death and rebirth that Campbell talks about in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and in Warlock 2, it's not a symbolic death and rebirth. It's just awful. Okay, back to the text. The sun was called Jonah, as appears from Gruter's inscriptions and other sources. And we have a footnote here. This is seen from the following, taken from Pictet, Pictet, du Colte de Carabi, page 104, and quoted by Higgins and Eclipsis, volume 1, page 630. And I'm guessing it's in French, might be Italian, but it's like Valenci dit que ion itot le mem que bal in Galois John le Seigneur Dieu la cause première in Basque Jonah, and so on. Dieu et Seigneur Matri le Scandinavies Appellantient le Soleil John Undes inscriptions de Grutier montre que les Troyens. And my apologies to anybody who actually speaks whatever language that is for butchering it. And it ends with, thus we see that the son was called Jonah by different nations of antiquity. I believe we'll just take his word for it. Okay. Back to the main text. In the Vedas, the 4 sacred books of the Hindus, when day and night, sun and darkness are opposed to each other, one is designated red and the other black. And Fuzznuts is now running through the house like a maniac for whatever reason. Got a footnote here. See Taylor, Early History of Mankind, page 345, and Goldziher, Hebrew Mythology, pages 102 and 103. Back to the main text. The red sun being swallowed up by the dark earth at night, as it apparently is when it sets in the west, to be cast forth again at day, is also illustrated in like manner. Jonah, Hercules, and others personified the sun, and a huge fish represents the earth. The earth represented as a huge fish is one of the most prominent ideas of Polynesian mythology. At other times, instead of a fish, we have a great raving wolf who comes to devour its victim and extinguish the sunlight. The wolf is particularly distinguished in ancient Scandinavian mythology, being employed as an emblem of the destroying power which attempts to destroy the sun. This is illustrated in the story of Little Red Riding Hood, the sun, who is devoured by the great black wolf, Night, and afterwards comes out unhurt. Footnote: in ancient Scandinavian mythology, the sun is personified in the form of a beautiful maiden. See Mallet's Northern Antiquities, page 438. Tyler, Primitive Culture, Volume 1, page 307. The story of Little Red Riding Hood, as we call her, or Little Red Cat, came from the same, i.e., the ancient Aryan source, and refers to the sun and the night. One of the fancies of the most ancient Aryan or Hindu stories was that there was a great dragon that was trying to devour the sun, and to prevent him from shining upon the earth and filling it with brightness and life and beauty, and that Indra, the sun god, killed the dragon. Now this is the meaning of the Little Red Riding Hood, as it is told in our nursery tales. Little Red Riding Hood is the evening sun, which is always described as red or golden. The old grandmother is the earth, to whom the rays of the sun bring warmth and comfort. The wolf, which is a well-known figure for the clouds and darkness of night, is the dragon in another form. First, he devours the grandmother, that is, he wraps the earth in thick clouds, which the evening sun is not strong enough to pierce through. Then, with the darkness of night, he swallows up the evening sun itself, and all is dark and desolate. Then, as in the German tale, the night thunder and the storm winds are represented by the loud snoring of the wolf. And then the huntsman, the morning sun, comes in all his strength and majesty and chases away the night clouds and kills the wolf and revives the old grandmother Earth and brings Little Red Riding Hood to life again. Bunce fairy tales, their origin and meaning. And now there is a tale, I think it's Russian, I don't know, I will have to check. In fact, let me check that now if I can. Okay. Those of you who listen to the Twit podcasts know who Leo Laporte is. He did one time read a story for Audible.com called Little Golden Hood. And I suspect, but I can't prove, that is a related story to Little Red Riding Hood. Doing a quick Google search on Little Golden Hood pulls up a story which I'll link to in the show notes that reads the same, and just quickly skimming it, as Little Red Riding Hood, save for a few minor details. I think that Leo has said that it was a Russian story. There doesn't seem to be, or at least it's not in the top listings in a Google search, a Wikipedia entry on it. So I don't know for certain, but they're definitely related. So that just did a little dingus that popped into my head, and I thought I'd mention. Now back to the text. The story of Little Red Riding Hood is mutilated in the English version. The original story was that the little maid and her shining red cloak was swallowed by the great black wolf, and that she came out safe and sound when the hunters cut open the sleeping beast. In regard to these heroes remaining 3 days and 3 nights in the bowels of the earth, they represent the sun at the winter solstice from December 22nd to the 25th. That is, for 3 days and 3 nights, the sun remains in the lowest regions in the bowels of the earth, in the belly of the fish. It is then cast forth and renews its career. I'm going to interject here. In one of Joseph Campbell's books, I don't remember if it's The Hero with 1,000 Faces or one of his other books, but he indicates that he has no idea why it is 3 days. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but he's talking about, this kind of thing, and he says, but why 3 days? And there's no answer. He doesn't provide an answer. This is one answer that the book gives, that it's the sun at its lowest point in the sky, and I imagine in the northernmost and southernmost latitudes it would be particularly noticeable. Well, I mean, considering the fact that the days are so short there at that time of year. Okay, back to the text. Thus we see that the story of Jonah being swallowed by a big fish meant originally the sun swallowed up by night, and that it is identical with the well-known nursery tale. How such legends are transformed from intelligible into unintelligible myths is very clearly illustrated by Professor Max Mueller, who, in speaking of the comparison of the different forms of Aryan religion and mythology in India, Persia, Greece, and Italy, and Germany, says, in each of these nations there was a tendency to change the original conception of divine powers, to misunderstand the many names given to these powers, and to misinterpret the praises addressed to them. In this manner, some of the Divine names were changed into half-divine, half-human heroes, and at last the myths which were true and intelligible as told originally of the sun or the dawn or the storms were turned into legends or fables too marvelous to be believed of common mortals. This process can be watched in India, in Greece, and in Germany. The same story, or nearly the same, is told of gods, of heroes, and of men. The divine myth became an heroic legend, and the heroic legend fades away into a nursery tale. Our nursery tales have well been called the modern patois of the ancient sacred mythology of the Aryan race. Footnote: Mueller's Chips, Volume 2, page 260. Pardon me for just a second. Fuzznuts! Shadow! Shadow is Fuzznut's brother by another mother, and the two of them are busy chasing each other around and doing naughty things, which has me concerned. Okay, back to the text. How striking are these words? How plainly they illustrate the process by which the story that was true and intelligible as told originally of the day being swallowed up by night, or the sun being swallowed up by the earth, was transformed into a legend or fable too marvelous to be believed by common mortals. How the divine myth became an heroic legend, and how the heroic legend faded away into a nursery tale. In regard to Jonah's going to the city of Nineveh and preaching unto the inhabitants, we believe that the old myth of civilization, so-called, is partially interwoven here, and that in this respect he is nothing more than the Indian fish avatar of Vishnu, or the Chaldean Oannes, O-A-N-N-E-S. And we got a footnote here. See Goldseer's Mythology, page 198. Okay. Back to the main text. At first, his avatar, Vishnu, is alleged to have appeared to humanity in form like a fish, or half man and half fish, just as Oannes and Dagon were represented among the Chaldeans and other nations. In the temple of Rama, in India, there is a representation of Vishnu which answers perfectly to that of Dagon. Mr. Maurice, in his History of Hindustan, has proved the identity of the Syrian Dagon and the Indian fish avatar, and concludes by saying, from the foregoing and a variety of parallel circumstances, I am inclined to think that the Chaldean Oannes, the Phoenician and Philistine Dagon, and the Pisces of the Syrian and Egyptian zodiac were the same deity with the Egyptian Vishnu. We got a footnote. History of Hindustan, Volume 1, pages 418 to 419. Back to the main text. And the old mythological remains of the Chaldeans, compiled by Berossus Abydeenus, Abydeenus, and Polyhistor, there is an account of one of Oannes, a fish god who rendered great service to mankind. This being is said to have come out of the Erythraean Sea, Erythraean. This is evidently the sun rising out of the sea, as it apparently does in the east. Professor Goldseer, speaking of Oannes, says that this founder of civilization has a solar character like similar heroes in all other nations is shown. In the words of Berossus, who says, during the daytime, Oannes held intercourse with man, but when the sun set, Oannes fell into the sea, where he used to pass the night. Here, evidently, only the sun can be meant, who, in the evening, dips into the sea, and comes forth again in the morning, and passes the day on the dry land in the company of men. Dagon was sometimes represented as a man emerging from a fish's mouth, and sometimes as half man and half fish. It was believed that he came in a ship and taught the people. Ancient history abounds with such mythological personages. There was also Durga, a fish deity among the Hindus, represented as a full-grown man emerging from a fish's mouth. Footnotes. Civilizing gods who diffuse intelligence and instruct barbarians are also solar deities. Among these, Ones takes his place as the sun god, giving knowledge and civilization. Reverend S. Baring Gould, Career Smiths, page 367. Back to the main text. The Philistines worshipped Dagon, and in Babylonian mythology, Dagon is applied to a fish-like being who rose from the waters of the Red Sea as one of the benefactors of men. Footnote. See Smith's Dictionary of the Bible and Chambers Encyclopedia article Dagon in both. Back to the main text. On the coins of Ascalon, where she was held in great honor, the goddess Derceto, Terceto, or Atergatis, Atergatis, is represented as a woman with her lower extremities like a fish. This is Semiramis, Semiramis, who appeared at Joppa as a mermaid. She is simply a personification of the moon who follows the course of the sun. At times she manifests herself to the eyes of men, at others she seeks concealment in the western flood. Footnote 2. See Baring Gould's Curious Myths. I think it's The Hero with 1,000 Faces, in which Campbell says that the earliest myths of sun gods are if you go to the very beginning tales, the god is a female figure and not a male figure. And one of the few remaining holdovers of that is found in Japanese mythology, and I cannot remember the name of the particular goddess that he refers to. Okay, back to the main text. The sun god, Phoebos, traverses the sea in the form of a fish and imparts lessons of wisdom and goodness when he has come forth from the green depths. All these powers or qualities are shared by Proteus and Hellenic story, as well as by the fish god Dagon or Ones. Let's see here, what footnote is this? Since writing the above, we find that Mr. Bryant, in his Analysis of Ancient Mythology, Volume 2, page 291, speaking of the mystical nature of the name John, which is the same as Jonah, says, the prophet who was sent upon an embassy to the Ninevites is styled Iones, a title probably bestowed upon him as a messenger of the deity. The great patriarch who preached righteousness to the antediluvians is styled On and Ones, which is the same as Jonah. Back to the main text. In the Iliad and Odyssey, Atlas is brought into close connection with Helios, the bright god, the Latin soul, and our sun. In these poems, he rises every morning from a beautiful lake by the deep-flowing stream of ocean, and having accomplished his journey across the heavens, plunges again into the western waters. The ancient Mexicans and Peruvians had likewise semi-fish gods. Jonah, then, is like these other personages, insofar as they are all personifications of the sun. They all come out of the sea. They are all represented as a man emerging from a fish's mouth, and they are all benefactors of mankind. We believe, therefore, that it is one and the same myth, whether Ones, Jones, or Jonas, differing to a certain extent among different nations, just as we find to be the case with other legends. This we have just seen illustrated in the story of Little Red Riding Hood, which is considerably mutilated in the English version. Figure number 5 is a representation of Dagon, intended to illustrate a creature half man and half fish, or perhaps a man emerging from a fish's mouth. It is taken from Layard. Figure number 6 is a representation of the Indian avatar of Vishnu coming forth from the fish. It would answer just as well for a representation of Jonah as it does for the Hindu divinity. It should be noted that in both of these, the god has a crown on his head surmounted with a triple ornament, both of whom had evidently the same meaning, i.e. an emblem of the Trinity. And we have a footnote. Higgins' Anacalypsis, Volume 1, page 634. See also Calmet's Fragments, 2nd 100, page 78. Okay. The Indian avatar, being represented with 4 arms, evidently means that he is a god of the whole world, his 4 arms extending to the 4 corners of the world. The circle, which is seen in one hand, is an emblem of eternal reward. The shell, with its 8 convolutions, is intended to show the place in the number of the cycles which he occupied. The book and sword are to show that he ruled both in the right of the book and of the sword. Some of the illustrations he gives good information as to where they can be found elsewhere. But I've had trouble doing screen grabs off of Google Books, so I can't really do one. They are both of them pretty much as he's described them. So don't feel bad if you missed out. If you want to see them on the Google Book versions, you can find them on pages 83 and 84. And that is the end of the chapter. Let me see here, because how long is the next chapter? Okay, and taking a quick look at it, it seems fairly short, so I'm going to go ahead and read that since I'm at about the 40-minute mark or so. And I like to keep these things at about an hour. So, Chapter 10, Circumcision. In the words of the Reverend Dr. Giles, the rite of circumcision must not be passed over in any work that concerns the religion and literature of the Jewish people. We got a footnote. Giles, Hebrew and Christian Records, Volume 1, page 249. Back to the main text. The first mention of circumcision in the Bible occurs in Genesis, where God is said to have commanded the Israelites to perform this rite and thereby establish a covenant between him and his chosen people. "This is my covenant," said the Lord, "which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every male child among you shall be circumcised." We need not doubt, says the Reverend Dr. Giles, that a divine command was given to Abraham that all his posterity should practice the rite of circumcision. Come on. Lost my place there for a second. Such may be the case if we believe that the Lord of the universe communes with man. We need not doubt this, yet we are compelled to admit that nations other than the Hebrews practice this rite. The origin of it, however, as practiced among other nations, has never been clearly ascertained. It has been maintained by some scholars that this rite drew its origin from considerations of health and cleanliness, which seems very probable, although doubted by many. And we've got a footnote here. Mr. Herbert Spencer shows, Principles of Sociology, pages 290 and 295 that the sacrificing of a part of the body as a religious offering to their deity was and is a common practice among savage tribes. Circumcision may have originated in this way, and Mr. Wake, speaking of it, says, "The origin of this custom has not yet, so far as I am aware, been satisfactorily explained. The idea that, under certain climactic conditions, circumcision is necessary for cleanliness and comfort does not appear to be well founded, as the custom is not universal, even within the tropics." Phallism in Ancient Religions, page 36. Okay, back to the main text as soon as I can find my spot. Whatever may have been its origin, it is certain that it was practiced by many of the ancient Eastern nations who never came in contact with the Hebrews in early times, and therefore could not have learned it from them. The Egyptians practiced circumcision at a very early period. Footnote: other men leave their private parts as they are formed by nature, except those who have learned otherwise from them. But the Egyptians are circumcised. They are circumcised for the sake of cleanliness, thinking it better to be clean than handsome. Herodotus, Book 2, Chapter 36. At least as early as the 4th dynasty, Pyramid 1, and therefore long before the time assigned for Joseph's entry into Egypt, from whom some writers have claimed the Egyptians learned it. Okay, footnote. We have it also on the authority of Sir J.G. Wilkinson that this custom was established long before the arrival of Joseph in Egypt, and that this is proved by the ancient monuments. Back to the main text. And the decorative pictures of Egyptian tombs, one frequently meets with persons on whom the denudation of the prepuce is manifested. On a stone found at Thebes, there is a representation of the circumcision of Ramses II. The mother is seen holding her boy's arms back while the operator kneels in front. Bow, chicka, wow, wow. All Egyptian priests were obliged to be circumcised, and Pythagoras had to submit to it before being admitted to the Egyptian sacerdotal mysteries. Herodotus, the Greek historian, says, "As this practice can be traced both in Egypt and Ethiopia to the remotest antiquity, it is not possible to say which first introduced it. The Phoenicians and Syrians of Palestine acknowledge that they borrowed it from Egypt. It has been recognized among the Kafirs and other tribes of Africa. It was practiced among the Fijians and Samoans of Polynesia and some races of Australia. The Suzis and the Mandingos circumcised their women. The Assyrians, Colchians, Phoenicians, and others practiced it. It has been from time immemorial a custom among the Abyssinians, though at the present time Christians. The antiquity of the custom may be assured by the fact of the New Hollanders, never known to civilizations until a few years ago, have practiced it." Page 12, footnote 12. Kendrick's Egypt, quoted by Dunlap, Mysteries of Adonai, page 146. The troglodytes on the shore of the Red Sea, the Idumeans, the Ammonites, Moabites, and Ishmaelites had the practice of circumcision. The ancient Mexicans also practiced this rite. It was also found among the Amazon tribes of South America. These Indians, as well as some African tribes, were in the habit of circumcising their women. Among the Campas, the women circumcised themselves, and a man would not marry a woman who was not circumcised. 2. This footnote, this was done by cutting off the clitoris, which is a little different than male circumcision. Back to the main text. They performed the singular rite upon arriving at the age of puberty. Jesus of Nazareth was circumcised. And I'm going to interject here. What do you suppose happened to the holy foreskin? And I mean, the Jewish custom, at least today, I don't know back then, but we'll assume it's the same for the sake of discussion, was that, 8 days after birth, you circumcise the little kid. Now, of course, in that period of time, they would have done it without anesthetic, etc., etc., etc. And, as King Missile says, Jesus was way cool. If he got sick, he could heal himself. So, I mean, there you are. You're an infant. Somebody's just lopped off the end of your dick. You're in pain. You're probably going to want to grab yourself, and, you've got healing power. So when you grab yourself, beep, you heal your dick. Now, when you heal your dick, does your foreskin grow back, or does it just heal up like you've never been cut? And does that little foreskin have like superpowers? I mean, like, can you go around and touch people and heal them with it, or does it like multiply and turn into like calamari or tortellini? Just kind of curious. Okay, back to the thing. And he had been really the founder of, let me restart this sentence. Jesus of Nazareth was, restart it one more time. Jesus of Nazareth was circumcised, and had he been really the founder of the Christian religion, so-called, it would certainly be incumbent on all Christians to be circumcised as he was, and to observe that Jewish law which he observed, and which he was so far from abrogating that he declared, heaven and earth shall pass away ere one jot or one tittle of that law should be dispensed with. There's a circumcision here, footnote here. Oh crap, I missed one. This goes back up earlier, but I'll read it now. It's talking about the Amazonians. Orton, the Andes and Amazonians, page 322, Gibbons, Rome, volume 4, page 563, and Bible for Learners, volume 1, page 319. At the time of the conquest, the Spaniards found circumcised nations in Central America and the Amazon. The Ticuna and Manoas tribes still observe this practice. In the South Seas, it has been met with among 3 different races, but it is performed in a somewhat different manner. On the Australian continent, not all, but the majority of tribes practice circumcision. Among the Papuans, the inhabitants of New Caledonia and the New Hebrides adhere to this custom. In his 3rd voyage, Captain Cook found it among the inhabitants of the Friendly Islands, in particular at Tonga Taboo, and the younger Pritchard bears witness to its practice in the Samoa or Fiji groups. Oscar Pichel, The Races of Man. Okay, now to the footnote I was trying to get to. In using the words the religion of Jesus, we mean simply the religion of Israel. We believe that Jesus of Nazareth was a Jew in every sense of the word, and that he did not establish a new religion or preach a new doctrine in any way, shape, or form. The preacher from the Mount, the prophet of the Beatitudes, does but repeat with persuasive lips what the lawgivers of his race proclaimed in mighty tones of command. Okay, now back to where I was. But the Christians are not followers of the religion of Jesus, they are followers of the religion of the pagans. This, we believe, we shall be able to show in part 2 of this work. Okay, that's it for that chapter. And one thing I want to point out that he doesn't discuss is that or at least he doesn't discuss in this part, is when they translated the Bible for the King James Version, they had issues with penis and would substitute feet Robert Price talks about this various times in the Bible Geek podcast, and he says that the sequence where, God is going to kill Moses because Moses isn't circumcised, and Moses' wife circumcises one of the little kids and then touches the foreskin to, as the King James Bible puts it, Moses' feet. According to Price, in reality, it shouldn't be Moses' feet that the amputated foreskin is touched to, but Moses' deck, and that somehow the circumcision of his kid is thereby transferred over to Moses, and this makes God okay with the whole thing, even though prior to this he'd been willing to kill Moses because Moses wasn't circumcised. And of course you don't really, at least I don't really know which sections, which mentions of the word feet should be translated as feet and which should be translated as penis. So, to be juvenile about it, just think about this when they talk about nailing Jesus' feet to the cross. Maybe they didn't nail his feet, maybe they nailed his dick, which would actually be a greater torture than having your feet nailed up, I would think. Anyways, that's the end of that chapter, as I said, so I'm going to wrap this up since we're about at the hour-long mark. Thanks for listening. You can follow the show on Twitter. TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle, and it's also on Facebook at facebook.com/TrailerParkAtheist. You can email me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes for this and most other episodes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. Don't forget to rate the show on iTunes. The next episode will be a news episode. Say goodnight, Fuzznuts. Damned cat.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.